Taking care of mom, my mother, and a little bit from my childhood. Stories from my life. Grandma's porch. Sit down, relax, enjoy. Here on Grandma's porch. Taking care of mom, my mother, and my childhood. Hello, y'all. I'm Dianna Brianne. Well, y'all know I've been telling little stories from my life, little bits and clips and snippets, not in chronological order. And I've just been sharing different ones. I wanted to come up for air, so to speak, from some of the heavier topics and share mostly light topics. Although I've shared a few not so light topics or not so light stories. And many of these stories I told about a year ago. Some I'm telling with more detail, some I'm repeating, and some are brand new. This one is kind of a combination of all of that. It's more brand new though, a little bit more in detail. And I've talked about my mom and my grandma, you know, and growing up, you know, I was born in a hospital, but my parents lived out on a farm. They divorced when I was about 4 years old, so my mom became a single mom when I was very, very young. And I remember that time. I remember, you know, I have a great memory, and I remember my parents being married, and I remember them going through a divorce. Even though I was probably 3 at the time, I do remember all of that. And so it was a very traumatic experience for a child to see their parents split up. And it did affect me. I would run after my daddy's truck when he would leave from visiting and chase him down the road, you know. And then when he became involved with other women and then eventually got married again, that was not necessarily the best of situations for me, because it really pulled me away from him. His wife really pulled me away, or the circumstances pulled me away. I was very young, so I really don't know, and I really don't know all the circumstances that surrounded it. But nonetheless, my mom was a single mom, and she raised us on very little money, and it was very hard. We had commodity boxes way before food stamps. Those were the boxes that we would go pick up, and they would have flour, milk, and eggs. And my mom was able to stretch $1, and she fed us well. She was able to do that. She, even throughout the years, taught me how to make homemade noodles out of just flour and water, and if we had eggs, eggs. And today I can make a meal out of almost nothing, and, you know, if I needed to. And I've taught my children that skill as well. So my mom had that skill of stretching $1 and knowing how to feed a family and knowing how to clothe a family. And my mom, we moved in a couple different houses. I've talked about that in the past. And we were the poor family, and we had an old car that sometimes only drove in reverse, and it was challenging. It was very challenging. My mother ended up going to nursing school, and during that time, I had a babysitter named Irene and Charles, which I told about in another video, which were a wonderful old couple. We went to Grandma's all the time and sat on Grandma's porch swing or in her kitchen, and Grandma's was a fixture in our life. We went about 3 times a week, and Grandma was such a stability in my life growing up in a chaotic childhood. She was my stability. She was my rock. I would call her on the phone. When we had a phone and she had a phone, we had the old rotary phone. Sometimes she didn't have a phone and sometimes we didn't have a phone. But when we both had phones, I would often call her at night, or my mother would call her at night. But often I talked to Grandma, and she would read the Bible to me, and we had this, she was wonderful. We would sit on her porch swing, and she lived out in the country in a little house, and the choo-choo would go by, and Grandpa would sit in the living room watching his Cowboys, on, I think they had 2 TV channels, even though they kind of lived down in a little tiny a town of about 10 houses. It was kind of a town within a town, but it was way out in the country by the railroad tracks. And so I used to stand out there and wave to the conductor and the caboose man back when they had a caboose. But anyhow, that was a big mainstay in our life, was going to Grandma's. And so my mom was in nursing school, and it was a very difficult time. She was then involved with a man for about 6 years, for about, I don't know what number of years it was, but she was involved with a man, and he was really, it was a relationship that was going to go nowhere. So my mom, trying to get out of that relationship numerous times, went and met someone new who was a great deal younger than her. And they got married within like 2 weeks of knowing each other, which was not a good thing to do. But I understand my mother's feeling of desperation, struggling financially. By then, my brother was in the military. My sister was married, living in another city. Well, we weren't living in a city. We were living in a very small town, but she was living in a city about 2 hours away. And so my mom married this man, and he was much younger than her, and he was a drunk, a real bad drunk. He had a paycheck coming in, so my mom would have to meet him before he spent it all on booze. And he had a family that was really, really dysfunctional, and they would pile in. And it was very traumatic for me because for a while there, it was only my mom and I, and as unstable as I felt our life was, it was calm. Now it was unstable and not calm when she married him, because he would be drunk and he would come home. And I don't want to speak bad about anybody, so I'm not going to try to go into great detail, but he would be drunk, and it was a lot of very bad commotion that would go on a regular basis. And sometimes I would have to hide out in the weeds at night until he slept off his drunk or fell asleep. And so I remember that, and that was very traumatizing for a small child, as I was at the time. And my mother wasn't with him a long time, but she was with him enough for it to have affected me, and be very scared, and become a little bit fearful, and a lot fearful, because we never knew what kind of mood he was going to be in, if he was going to be drunk or what was going to happen. So she eventually, we moved to California for a few months, for maybe less than a year, and then we moved back to our southern town. And it was kind of a really poorly town. But we moved back, and then they separated and got a divorce, which was a good thing. So then it was my mom and I again, and struggling again, and because she no longer had that extra paycheck. And so we were struggling. And then my mother met an amazing man, and he was an amazing man. His wife had passed on in terrible circumstances, which I'm not going to really go into, but they were not good circumstances, and she passed on, and then about a year later, my mom and he met. Well, she had met him, not really ever met him, but saw him at a wedding, so she knew who he was. And so later, they somehow, a relative of a relative type of situation connected the two of them, and they went out on a date, and within a few months they were married. And he was a great stepfather to me. He was the rock that I needed. He was just a perfect stepfather for me. My mom didn't love him, though. That was the problem. She did not love him. She was in love with somebody else, but that person wasn't available to her, so she ended up marrying him. And so their marriage was a bit tumultuous from her perspective, but he was wonderful to me. He provided a wonderful, stable home and someone I could depend on. He taught me how to drive my first car, which was a 65 Chevy Impala, and he restored that car for me because we bought it in the farm field for $75. My mother did, and drove it home, roaring and smoking. The car smoked as we made it home, and he was like, he had to go out, and he worked like 4 months on that car for me. So he was a wonderful stepfather, but that marriage was very rocky, and my mother was not happy in it. So when I left home at around the age of 17, which I talked about that story, my first apartment, the angel in the trench coat. So you have to go back and look at those, because all of this is not in order. But I would say that there were some very, very unhappy teenage years for me. At one point, before we moved again to a brand new house, when we first moved, we moved into his home, and it was a beautiful home. It was a wonderful home, but it had an upstairs that was originally created as a mother-in-law suite for the mother-in-law who passed, I guess, years beforehand. And so it was like a little apartment upstairs, and I stayed in that apartment. I always call myself Rapunzel, and there was a really cute guy my age across the way, and I would open up my double windows and I would dance in the window with my little 45 records, hoping he would see me, and I would wave to him like Rapunzel, and I would pretend he was my prince. I had a big old black typewriter up there, one of those really old-fashioned antique ones, and I learned to type amazing, up to 120 words a minute. Amazing. And to this day, I can type extremely fast because of my loneliness during that time, because we had shifted from one school to another. I didn't know anyone. And that school, even though it was a small town, they were very snooty and stuck up, and they only wanted people that they had grown up with. So I really didn't have many friends or anything at that particular juncture. And so I was very lonely, and I would just stay up there and type away and dance to I remember the song Jackie Blues, She Lives Her Life in a Room. And that was me. I felt like I lived my life in a room. And, but anyhow, we moved again, and I would run home at night listening to Catherine Kuhlman miracle services on the radio. I was very, while other kids were out probably doing all kinds of stuff, I was coming home listening to TV preachers and miracle services, and because Grandma taught me right. She taught me the Bible. She taught me right. And Grandma's teaching carried through with me in my life to do the right things and protected me all along the way. And Grandma's prayers were always over me. I always believe that when you say a prayer, it lasts forever. And so Grandma's prayers was over me, and it protected me, and so were my mother's. So anyhow, I talked about how my mother, pulled me out of that apartment and ended up in college. And then from college, we went to California. I've talked about those in other videos. And if I haven't put them up, I will put those up. So you just have to kind of put all this in order. So lo and behold, my mom and I ended up in California, and she would come back and forth, and she wasn't really happy. And my stepfather passed, he got cancer, and he passed went downhill pretty rapidly, and he passed. And my mother's life became, a lot of moving back and forth. She wanted to be with me, but she wasn't happy in California at the time. And then she'd go to Texas, where we had family friends, and she'd stay there for a while, and then she'd be back to the southern town, and then back. It was like a big circle, and this went on for years. And it became very costly to do that, because when you're opening up places and closing and buying furniture and all of that. And so eventually she settled in California, where I was. But that came over a period of time where she actually settled. And later in life, she took sick with Parkinson's and an ALS form of issue, the ALS, which was devastating on her body. But prior to that, as she was getting older, she kind of wedged herself and stayed in California, in Palm Springs area. And so she stayed there, and she met a man, and that was like marriage number 4. And she met him, and he was a nice man. He was a nice man, but it did not work out well. It did not have a good outcome, and it didn't last very long. And I think she married him more for security than anything. So that marriage ended up in a divorce. And but after that, my mom really was probably so stable in her. She had a nice place at that particular point, a little place, a nice place out in Palm Springs area. And I would go back and forth from Newport Beach area and stay with her. And my happiest time with my mom, my happiest time that I remember the most, the best, was during that time with my mom. Because, I mean, with her, in regards to my relationship with her, because I would go out there, stay for a night or two, and she would always have chips and salsa on the table for me, make me bacon and eggs for breakfast with toast. She was just wonderful. My mom was wonderful. She'd do my laundry for me. She'd let me sleep in her bed, and she'd sleep on the couch because she had a one bedroom. It was like a beautiful condo, but it was only one bedroom. So she let me sleep in her bed. And when I was there, she was wonderful to me. She was wonderful. And so that was really the best, my favorite time with my mom was when she had the condo there, the condo-like place there, and I would go back and forth because I had my own place, my own life, and yet I could come out there and, and it was going back and forth, and it was just so nice with my mom. And then when my brother passed on suddenly, it was very traumatic for her. It was traumatic for all of us, but it was especially traumatic for my mother. And so my mother really never quite got over that. And it really sent her kind of downhill after that. It's slowly, but kind of a downhill decline. And then she began to have health issues. And so she stayed in California. I met my husband, and I'm kind of condensing all this. There's a lot of years, a lot of experiences in all of this. I'm just kind of summing it up. And I loved my mom. My mom could be fun, funny, laughter. She was very dependable. She was so absolutely dependable, for me. She was my rock. I could depend on my mom. Throughout all my life, I talked to her every night on the phone. If I wasn't, there, I would talk to her on the phone. Right up until, the end, I would talk to her on the phone. When I was in Europe, we would fax each other letters back and forth because it was less expensive than making the phone call back then, because it was very expensive to make a phone call. So she got a fax machine, learned how to do it. So we'd write letters back and forth, and it would only be 1 minute of phone time that we would have to use rather than, a lot of time. So she loved that. She loved to write me letters, and she'd fax me several letters a day, and I'd fax her several letters a day. And then she finally got email, when email finally came up, and it was something called web TV, I think, where she could do it through her TV, and she took her forever to learn how to do it, but once she did, she just lived for her emails. So I met my husband. We were traveling Europe. I talked to my mom. So at that point, beyond the faxed emails, we would talk about 3 times a week on the phone for about 10, 15 minutes in the beginning because it was so expensive. But we had such a close, amazing relationship. And so let's fast forward a little bit. I have children now, and my husband and I are living down in Texas, and my mom is taking sick out in California. And she lived for her phone calls for me, but she couldn't talk a long time because she dropped the phone. So I knew that things were bad. Finally, it reached a point where I sent my husband was willing to drive out there and bring her back in our expedition, and brought her back. When she came back, she was in diapers. And it was just so traumatic for me to see my mom be reduced down from a disease that she had. Parkinson's was ravishing her body, a form of ALS, I believe, that she had along with that. And it was terrible. And I was homeschooling at the time, and I remember it was just overwhelming. My mother was sick. I was taking care of her. We were in the process of moving back to Georgia, so we were in the process of a move. We weren't even sure quite where at in Georgia we were moving. And I told that story called The Haunted House before, moving back to Georgia. And when we first got there, and my kids, I was homeschooling. So I had all this going on, and I was just overwhelmed. I did a fantastic job of taking care of everybody, but not myself. I was falling apart inside. And I remember looking out in the yard, and they were pounding a sign in my yard because we lived in this beautiful kind of area. And there was something I had wanted for a long time. And right before that, I said, God, if everything's going to be okay, please give me a sign. Well, I didn't think God was going to give me a literal sign. And out in the front yard, they were pounding a sign. And I didn't know what it was, but I had wanted Yard of the Month for a long time. And here they were pounding the sign. I went out and looked at what the sign was, and it said Yard of the Month. Yard of the Month. That was my sign that everything was going to be okay. And I just started crying and crying and crying. it was just a big release. And anyhow, we got moved. We took my mom to Georgia. That was just craziness because she had California health insurance, and when she went to the hospital, she needed to go to a nursing home after because she was just so weak. But we couldn't get her into a nursing home initially because of no one would recognize her insurance. So it was very complicated. So me and my three kids and I, they were really little. I'd give them a Happy Meal. They'd sit in the back seat of the car and color and coloring books. And I would drive all over Georgia looking for a nursing home that would accept my mother. We finally found one about an hour away, and it was on backcountry roads. And I would drive twice a day to it. I got her in that when I found it. So immediately they took her there. And that was just so traumatic, all that experience, because the hospital wanted to put her in this really bad nursing home, and I wouldn't let that be. So she was in the nursing home for about 3 months, and then she begged to come back home. And so we brought her back home. We had a mother-in-law suite at both of the houses, at the haunted house and then at the house that we bought. And when we got over to the house that we bought, it was a wonderful mother-in-law suite, but she was just deteriorating rapidly, where she was having a hard time standing. But she'd want to go down and get the mail every day, and I would pray. I would say, Mom, let me go with you. And she'd say, no, I want to do this independently. And she'd go down, wobble down to the mailbox and wobble back up, and I was always praying that she'd make it back up okay. Well, one day she went down the mailbox, and she'd only eat TV dinners at that point, and she couldn't even hardly eat that because she was choking on her food a lot. And so one day she came out, she put her TV dinner on the counter and said, give it to Matthew, I can't eat it. And then she went back and laid down. And at that point, about 45 minutes later, she called me and said, Diane. She called me Diane. She said, Diane, I can't get up. I can't get up. And somehow the Parkinson's ALS had hit her brain, and she was like a stroke, but it wasn't a stroke. We thought she had a stroke at first. So I tried to get her up to the bathroom, couldn't get her up. My girlfriend came over to help me get her up because she pooped all over herself. It was terrible. And we called 911, and 911 took her, and she got to the hospital, and she was so sick, and they put a tube like in through her belly, so she wasn't able to come home at that point. So she ended up at a closer nursing home, and I would go over 3 times a day. I would take the kids in the morning or whenever, and then I would go over a couple of times a day by myself. I supervised her care, made sure she was getting fantastic care the whole time, since she wasn't in my home and I couldn't take care of her at that point. And the ALS, the Parkinson's, just kept deteriorating her to such a point that it was an awful experience for her and for us to see her go through this. But I was there every step of the way with her. Finally, at the very end, I told this story before, where she had a blood transfusion, and all of a sudden she came back to life, so to speak, meaning her mind came back, because towards the end she was just screaming all the time. The last couple of months she would just scream at the nursing home. You could hear her from one end to the other. It was like a repetitious thing. Somehow that disease had hit her brain. But when she had that blood transfusion, for about 2 weeks, she was as clear as a bell. And that was awesome and amazing to have that relationship during that time. So my mom just continued to deteriorate, but I was there with her every step of the way. And, you know, taking care of her was very challenging and difficult, because when she was with us in Georgia, she was falling down all the time. And so I'd have to pad the walls. I'd make sure the walls were padded, the edges of the walls, the edges of the table, you know, because they were putting her on different medicines that were regulating her blood pressure and all that, and she'd lose her balance. And so it was very, very challenging. You know, and so, you know, not only did I have 3 children and homeschooling, and moving to a new state and dealing with all of her issues in regards to insurances and everything, but I was also dealing with her health issues, which was devastating to me to see my mom so sick. But I took wonderful, amazing care of her. And then when she was in the nursing home, though, she just continued to go downhill. And it wasn't anything to do with the nursing home or the care. It was just that the body was being ravaged from this horrible disease. And so the last day of her life, she was in the hospital at my recommendation, because I felt that she was going downhill heal so much, I asked them to take her to the hospital, and they did for about 3 days. And I was over there all the time, and I'd spent the whole day with my mom. But I had to go pick my kids up from school because I had put them back in school at that point, public school rather than homeschool, because I had so much going on. And prior to that, I would drive back and forth to the nursing home that was elsewhere, the first nursing home, and that was like an hour away. And I would be so tired at night coming home by myself on these country roads that one time I almost ran off the road. And then after that, I had to cut back the amount of days that I was going up there, because I was going up like 2-3 times a day, an hour away, an hour to and from on country roads. But I love my mom, and it was all worth it because she was always there for me. She had always been there for me. And so the last day, I'd spent the day with her, and I went to say goodbye, but the cleaning lady came into the room. And now in hindsight, I wish I would have said to the cleaning lady, please just wait, let me say goodbye to my mom. But I didn't think my mom was going to pass that day. I thought, because it had been so surreal. Although a week prior to that, I felt that she was going to pass. It was the Spirit of God, I say, it was letting me know to be prepared. But somehow I was in denial that was going to take place because she'd been sick for so long. I figured she'd just continue on. So I was with my mom. So the cleaning lady was in there when I was saying goodbye to her. I said, Mom, I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow. She was pretty much comatose at that point. But I knew she could hear me. I felt that she could hear me. And I held her hand and told her how much I loved her and everything like that. I've always told my mom how much I loved her. Every time we talk on the phone, I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. And my kids do that with me. We all do that with each other. And so anyhow, I went home, and that night I was exhausted. I went to bed, and about midnight the phone rang, and it was the hospital, and they said, your mom is fixing to pass. And that's how they put it. It wasn't the best way to put it, but that's how they put it. And they were letting me know, and I said, okay, I'll get dressed. I'll come right over. And I went to get dressed, and right 10 minutes later, they said, your mom has already passed. And they called back, and I was devastated. It was surreal. How this person that had given me birth and loved me and raised me and all these rich experiences that we had together, how could suddenly now she be gone? How could she be gone? And so it was very, very traumatic for me, and just the whole thing. And it was me that was taking care of her up to that point. My sister was unable to take care of her at that point, and or help me. And so it was really all on me, minus my husband being able to help to some small degree. And it was all on me. It was all on me. But I did an amazing job. Was it exhausting, tiring? Yes, it was one of the hardest years of my life. I don't think I ever looked so bad in my life. And I always say I would never let myself look like that again because I was tired all the time. We had baby monitors in the house when my mom was there. In order for me, I would, because she was in the mother-in-law suite, and I'd run up and down the 3 flights of stairs in the first house in Georgia. And, I would listen to every, waking moment if she got up in the middle of the night so she wouldn't fall. I'd run down the steps. And so I really didn't get very much sleep back then. It was very, very hard. And remember, I had 3 small children, and we just got to Georgia. I had no support team around me because I didn't know anybody at that time, and we just got back to Georgia in a new city near Atlanta. But I'm so grateful that I was able to take care of my mom. So after my mom passed, I've had, I dream about her still to this day, all the time. And it's been years since she's passed, probably 12 years. And I still dream about her all the time. And as y'all know, when I got sick 10 years ago, she came to me in a dream and told me exactly what was going on. And I went to the hospital and told them, and they did the CAT scan. You'll have to go back and look at that. It's called health crisis or something like that. And so she even came back after, in my belief, to let me know what was going on, to let me know. She loved me that much. She loved me that much, and I loved my mom. My mom was just such an amazing, kind woman. She was a giver. She gave, she loved, she cared about people. She was thoughtful. She had the gift of hospitality. She made people, you know, she just was kind. She was very, very kind. And I remember one day she was saying, this is when she was quite old. She said, I went to McDonald's and I saw this man that didn't look like he had any food. So I went and I bought him a hamburger. That was the type of person she was. That was, as frail as she was, she went over and bought him a hamburger and French fries and milkshake or whatever. That was my mom. But I took amazing care of my mom. I watched over my mom, and I am so grateful for that. Was it exhausting, tiring, worn out? Yes, I was emotionally depleted, physically depleted, everything depleted. But it was worth it, taking care of her, because she had taken care of me. She had been there for me all along. And, you know, she grew up so poor. She grew up in the Great Depression when things were really, really, really poor in a small country town, very small country town, in a 3-room house, not a 3-bedroom house, a 3-room house with 5 children. And I mean, times were tough. So all of that stayed with her, that fear of not enough, the fear of not enough. And that kind of haunted her throughout her life, of the fear of not enough, because she grew up in such a poverty-stricken period of time. And only people that grew up in that era could have understood what it was like to grow up in such dire circumstances. And so she used to tell me stories about how grandma used to make her clothes out of a flour sack, you know, the old flour sacks, the feed sacks or whatever they were, and they were kind of rough material. And so she grew up very, very, very poor, and her life was challenging, and she had many challenges to overcome. But she wanted a better life for herself. And so towards the end of her life, she ended up in Palm Springs, which was totally the opposite of where she had come from. The yin to the yang. And it's just totally opposite. And she needed that. She needed that in her life. The glitz and the glamour, the superficial, because things had been so hard throughout her life. And, you know, I am just so grateful. Whenever I lose something, or, you know, or one of my kids lose something, I'll say, Mom, would you please go find it for us? And I can tell you stories which would amaze you, that we find things. One in particular was a business card from about 25 years ago. Now, my mom had nothing to do with this person. We were living in Europe. At the time, and I wanted this phone number of this person from Europe. My mom had no connection whatsoever to this person. And I said, Mom, please help me find this number. And my mom was past, you know, about 8 or 9 years at that point, maybe 10 years, I don't know. And in my spirit, as if she spoke to me, go to my wallet. I've always kept her wallet with her driver's license and her glasses in the back of my closet. Now, there's no reason that card would even be remotely near there, even if I had the card. I went to her wallet, I opened her wallet, and there, that business card that had nothing to do with my mother was inside her wallet. Inside her wallet. Isn't that amazing? Absolutely amazing. And I've had so many other stories similar to that. When I lose something, I call on my mom. And so I always feel that my mom is with me, and I miss her so much. She was an amazing mom. Was she perfect? No, I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect person. People are not perfect, but she was an amazing mom, a wonderful mom. And I'm glad I was there for her. So taking care of someone who's sick, whether it's a parent or a child or a spouse or a relative or anyone, can be extraordinarily difficult. It can be extraordinarily difficult not only on the person who's sick, but the person who's taking care of them. And it did take its physical toll on me, I think, and its emotional toll, but I did a great job for everybody. It's just I wish I could have taken a better job of taking care of myself at that time. But sometimes you can't do and be it all, and something's got to give. But I made it through. Okay? So I wanted to come on here and just talk a little bit about my childhood, a little bit about taking care of Mom at the end, and about my mother. And she was an amazing, wonderful woman. And so was my grandma. Those two women were just amazing. And I miss my sister too. And my sister was the best listener of anybody. She could listen, listen, listen. And she was a great listener. But my mom, well, she had that warmth about her. She was such a warm, wonderful person. And so many of my qualities, maybe most of them, come from my mom. Well, from my house to yours, may God bless you. Oh, and I wanted to just add one more little thing. In regards to all my fathers, I reconnected with Daddy later in life, and we had a very close relationship. Daddy was not really my biological father. I was to find out later. I had another man who was my biological father. And, you know, because I guess my parents were going through a divorce when I was conceived, and there was another man, and he was a wonderful man that I remember only when I was really small, that I did try to reconnect with later in life, but he passed on. I think of a stroke. I'm not sure if it was a stroke or cancer or what, but he passed on, so I didn't really get to reconnect in adulthood. But I remember my mom taking me to visit him at his work, and we would sit in the car. He'd come out on his lunch hour, and he would give me a bag of coins. And I never really knew who this man, what the significance was, but I really liked him. He was wonderful. And I really think that I look so much like him, but I also look like my mom. I look probably mostly like my mom, but I also look a lot like him. But yet Daddy, my legal dad, was you know, I'm so glad that we had reestablished a relationship later in life. He was amazing. And I believe that someday when I go to heaven, all these people will be waiting for me over on the other side when that day comes. And in regards to my mom, that one husband who drank, well, he was, I don't know what happened to him, but I wish him well. I think he was a good man underneath that just was so misguided in his life. And then the stepfather that I had that was amazing and wonderful. I was so blessed to have had him. And then that brief stepfather that I had, and you know, I was well into my own adulthood by then. My mom married. That didn't work out, but he was a good man. I think he was a good man. It just didn't go right with my mom. And so for me, I'm very fortunate. I've picked a great husband, or a great husband picked me. And I think part of that is I wanted that stability in my life, of somebody that, you know, I knew what it was like to see someone go through difficult marriages, and I didn't want that, especially with children. I wanted a wonderful, solid marriage, and I'm so grateful that I have that. So I wanted to just come on here and share all that with you. I do hope you like, share, subscribe to all 5 channels. Links are pinned to the top of the comment section below. May God bless you, and I hope to talk to you soon again. Bye-bye. Porch, a place to relax.